24 November. At about midday, one of the machine guns on our right flank suddenly starts hammering away. Then we hear rifle fire. The firing becomes more intense, and next we see Russian infantry appearing through the haze. I am meeting the enemy face to face for the first time, and, apart from an undeniable curiosity, also feel an enormous amount of nervousness and excitement. The brown, huddled figures remind me somehow of a great herd of sheep moving over a snow-covered field. As soon as the herd comes under fire from us, they hesitate for a moment, move apart from each other, and then immediately move forward again. We are firing from all positions. Only our machine gun is silent. What is the matter? I have concentrated so fiercely on the Russians that I have paid no attention to Petch. Why doesn't he shoot? His ammunition belt is in place, his machine gun is okay. Then I hear Düring call over, "What's wrong, Petch? Why don't you shoot?" Yes, why doesn't he shoot? Some of the enemy fall, hit by rifle fire and fire from Meinhardt's machine gun, but the mass continues undeterred towards us. I am in turmoil, and feel fear in every part of my body. Why is Petch dabbling with his hands all over the machine gun instead of pulling the trigger? The questions are screaming out within me. His entire body is shaking, as in a fever, and the barrel of his machine gun is wandering backwards and forwards. He's had it. His nerves are gone, and he can't open fire. What should I do? I can't just push him away from the weapon and take his place. I still have too much respect for him, but every second is precious. Finally it happens. A burst of fire comes from the barrel. Every third bullet is a tracer round. The stream of light passes way over the heads of the attackers, disappearing into the haze. The next burst is also poorly aimed and goes high into the clouds. By now the attackers have located our machine gun. The bullets swarm around our heads and bury themselves in the embankment behind us. Petch suddenly yells out. He holds a bleeding ear and falls into the trench. Zeidel, who has seen what has happened, looks after him. This is my chance. I immediately get behind the machine gun and fire some short, carefully aimed bursts, just as I learned how. I aim into the mass of the advancing Soviet infantry. Grommel is now beside me, helping me by feeding in the ammunition belt. My aim is good, and several of the brown-clad figures fall to the ground. The waving mass stops for a moment, but then moves ahead, bent double, step by step, right for us. My mind goes blank. I only see the advancing stream of enemy soldiers coming directly at us. I again fire straight into it. Only fear is there, fear of this dirty brown heap of destruction constantly moving closer, which wants to kill me and everyone around me. I do not even feel the burning pain on the inner surface of my right hand, which I have caught on the hot metal while changing barrel seconds after getting a jam. This is crazy. We are firing with 4 machine guns and at least 80 carbines from secure, covered positions into the advancing horde. Our machine gun bursts rip openings in their ranks. Dead and wounded are hitting the ground all the time, but more of them are coming through the haze, and we can't see them clearly. The first ones are now so close to our positions that we can readily make out the plump, bent figures with rifles and Russian Kalashnikovs. Then suddenly 2 of the machine guns on our right flank are silenced. Immediately the mass moves towards that flank from which they are now getting only rifle fire. Together with Meinhardt, I continue to fire into it as it moves towards the right. Their move now becomes their undoing. The heavy, hard-hitting fire of the 20mm quad anti-aircraft guns also comes as a surprise to us. Their bursts sound like low, regulated beats on a drum. We can see how the tracer rounds spew out of all 4 barrels and hit the middle of the attacking mass, tearing huge gaps in its ranks. Our 2 machine guns on the right flank start firing again. I assume now that their silence was deliberate. The quad machine gun is now raking the attackers in front of us, and when it stops firing, stillness descends over the battlefield. We can hear calls and crying in Russian. I take a deep breath. The first battle with the enemy has affected me deeply, but now all my thoughts are working again. I raise my head out of the trench and peer into the field ahead. In front of us lie innumerable brown clumps on the snow. The quad's fabulous firepower still amazes me. I never imagined it would have an effect like that. The train in front of us is quiet, and I, in my innocence, believe that all the attackers are either dead or wounded. As I move a bit further out of my trench to get a better look, a Russian machine gun opens fire. The bullets zip around my ears. Then a second machine gun starts firing and spraying us. Shortly after this, I hear a sound that I recognize from Stalingrad, and the mortar rounds start landing all around. "Mortars!" someone yells, and shortly afterwards, Düring and Markovitz are wounded. "We need a medic." Someone calls back that the medic is on his way. I later discover that the Gefreiter Markovitz, who was once a driver in our squadron, has taken a bullet through his shoulder and has had to be evacuated. Unteroffizier Düring, however, is only slightly injured on the cheek. At his own request, he stayed where he was. Petsch has lost his right ear. We're all delighted when they bring him back to the village. The mortar fire is so intense that we dare not stretch our heads over the trenches. But then we hear the familiar plop of our own mortars. The pioneers have moved into position and are now beginning their own counterfire. Their rounds rise up and over and are exploding somewhere in the haze, where, it is assumed, the enemy is located. Gingerly, I raise myself out of my trench in order to watch what is going on, and I cannot believe my eyes. Many of the brown lumps, which I thought were dead or wounded, are now standing up and are moving off. Under cover of their own machine gun and mortar fire, they are retreating. Barrios has also realized this, and he calls out from the neighboring hole, "Hey, the Russians are leaving." Now our mortar rounds are landing right in the middle of the retreating Russians. For the quad machine gun crews, either the range is too great or they are saving their ammunition for later. It's not long before the Russians have disappeared in the fog. I've just filled my pipe with tobacco when the order to counterattack comes. We are to clear the area in front of our positions and stay on the heels of the Soviets for a while longer. Before I jump out of my hole and throw the machine gun, ready to fire, over my right shoulder, I light my pipe and take a couple of deep drags. Tobacco never tasted so good, and it feels as if I have gained new strengths. We fan out on a broad front and get only sporadic counterfire. We fire back and move slowly forward. Close behind, the quad machine gun follows on its carriage. As we get to the fallen Russians, we discover that the wounded have been taken away. For the first time, I see the dead enemy in front of me. The bodies are lying spread out over the snow, and sometimes close together, just as they fell. Wearing thick coats, they are either stretched out or bent over. Red puddles of blood are frozen on the snow. My stomach is churning, and I cannot bring myself to look at their colorless faces. Now, for the first time, when I see the lifeless bodies before me, my consciousness really grasps the meaning of death. As a young person, you tend to push these thoughts far away from you, but here there is no way to escape them. These people are our enemies, but even so, they are flesh and blood, just like us. And just as they are lying here now, so could I, or some of us, be lying here dead and motionless in this ice-cold snow. I glance over at Grommel, who is carrying 2 ammunition boxes for me. The poor chap is as white as a sheet, and his eyes are staring towards the front so as to avoid looking at the corpses. The others are doing the same. Cooper, Wilke, and I go up to a dead soldier who only has a bloody half of his head left because the other half was probably torn away by an exploding shell. Wilke turns away, just as I do, while Cooper has to summon all his strength to stop himself throwing up. For us newcomers, the first sight of a dead body gives a feeling of confusion, fright, and helplessness. Unless perhaps someone is of such a robust character and is so insensitive to human feelings that he is not affected. Someone like the little black Unteroffizier von der Infantry who looks like a gypsy. His name is Schwarz, and I saw him 2 days ago in position on the MSR. I met up with him again here as Grommel and I were advancing against the weak but still dangerous enemy fire, behind some flat ground rising over our left flank. While we were here, we also stumbled across a circular-shaped earthwork. Round and center circle dug out fairly deep in the ground was another wren dug down to the height of a man. Meinhardt had mentioned these features while he was still in our defensive positions. He said that while the division was advancing, they used them for their artillery, and anti-aircraft guns, and we could now expect the Soviets to use them for themselves. This was obviously correct, for scattered around there were a number of dead Soviet soldiers. This is when I hear this black Unteroffizier telling a soldier to shoot a crumpled figure in the head. He himself had the muzzle of his submachine gun against the back of another soldier's head. Both shots sounded muffled and unpleasant, much as if one had shot into a sack. I was shocked, and I shuddered. Is a man so full of hate that he even has to dishonor the dead? After this, he walks past me towards another fallen soldier. He kicks the body, which is lying on its side, really hard in the stomach, and mutters angrily, "This one too is still alive." He places his barrel directly on the forehead of the soldier and fires. The body, which I had assumed to be dead, convulses. "Why don't we take them prisoner?" I ask him angrily. The black sergeant just looks at me in disgust and growls. "Then just try to get them up when they are plain dead. The swine think we won't realize they're alive and will cut us down from behind. I've seen it before." How can I answer him? I'm still not conversant with all the underhanded things that are done in warfare. But I would never shoot an unarmed soldier, even if it was to my personal disadvantage. What I consider unworthy and terrible, the Unteroffizier only looks upon as the safety measure for our own protection. He simply says, him or us. Nevertheless, I can't bring myself to fire if I'd not attacked, and I don't intend ever to change my mind. Grommel is also upset, and so he presses on, and I have to hurry to catch up with him. All the time I can hear these muffled shots to the head, and they really shake me to the marrow. Although the Unteroffizier may have a very logical argument, I still reckon a large part of his thinking comes from the rather sadistic nature which such people can satisfy in time of war under the pretext of legitimacy. Meinhardt says that the Soviets commit atrocities on our soldiers and often do not take prisoners. So our side behaves in the same manner. He says this is the way of war, with its constantly increasing avalanches of hate. It begins with an attack and then combat. The two enemies fight for their lives, and it develops into grim determination and overreaction from both sides that leads to revenge and retaliation in accordance with the motto, "As you do unto me, so I do unto you." Oh, and heaven help the loser. I've never heard Meinhardt speak like this before, but I suppose he's right. I haven't been in the war long enough to be able to conform in opinion. Our counterattack is over, and we arrive at the jumping-off point of the Soviet attack. The enemy has in the meantime withdrawn far behind these positions, so we take them over, keeping on the alert. After dark, we are given hot coffee and our rations. The vehicles take 5 wounded back to the village. On one of the vehicles are 1 dead and 1 slightly wounded soldier. We don't know either man. Some of the soldiers tell us that they have found German rations and cigarettes in the Soviet soldiers' kit bags. On the wrist of a commissar, they also found a German Thiele wristwatch, with a name inscribed under the second lid. The driver from the supply vehicle will give them to the pioneer Hauptmann. We spent the night in the new positions. It's bloody cold, and an icy easterly wind penetrates into our very bones. Anyone not unwatched at an observation post sits huddled in his cold foxhole and dozes until morning.